Good evening, everybody. Good evening. And welcome. I'm Suzanne Crowder-Hahn. I'm the Vice President of the RAS Korea branch, and it's very nice to see all of you here. We welcome friends and members here in Seoul who join us in person, as well as people who are joining us via Zoom from all over the world. So thank you. The RAS is sincerely thankful and grateful to the Asia Development Foundation for its continued financial support. We also are very thankful to our member Lee Jung-ho from the TCS Tour Lab for helping us with this venue. She's in the back there. Please give her a big round of applause to thank her for providing this nice venue for us. Please be reminded that lecture content does not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of the Royal Asiatic Society. And tonight we have lecture number 1506, and we will be hearing from Dr. Andrei Lankov about the North Korean workers in Russia.
Not only lecture.
I don't think he needs an introduction, but I will give you a little information about him. He was born and raised in Leningrad, now Petersburg, and he completed his undergraduate and graduate studies at Leningrad State University, receiving his Ph.D. in 1989. He also did a year or so at Kim Il-sung University in Pyongyang. He taught Korean history at the Australian National University from 1996 to 2004. And since then, since 2004, he's been teaching at Kookmin University and is now currently in the College of Social Studies. I think you can hear me without this. He also serves as the director of the KoreaRisk.com group, a specialist information and analysis firm. His major research interest is in North Korean history and society. He's published many books about North Korea and has contributed to the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Financial Times, and Newsweek, as well as published a number of academic articles, including articles in foreign affairs and foreign policy. In 2017, the Foreign Policy magazine included him in its list of global thinkers. We're very fortunate to have him with us tonight, so let's please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Unfortunately or fortunately, I have not prepared slides because I'm getting used to the PPT. And the problem is that even if either I speak language with a strong accent, or audience has problem with understanding languages I speak, so I got used to it after teaching at the universities. But maybe it was not quite a choice, but maybe it will make me a bit more free in planning my 45 to 50 minutes presentation, followed by Q&A. And I'm going to say something which is likely to sound quite controversial, to put it mildly. So I believe the remarks about the RAS not sharing the view is a safe way of distancing, but something I have always been absolutely certain about and quite eager to pick up the fight after we finish. So today, we are going to talk about the North Korean workers in Russia, about the present state of the project. I did some research, quite a lot actually, about 5 years ago. I interviewed a number about, I'm not sure, maybe 10, 15 former North Koreans who have been in Russia as workers and are now residing here. I went a couple of times to Russia to basically a bit in Petersburg, but not very successful in this regard, largely in Vladivostok. I talked to the employers of the North Korean workers, and I didn't talk to them themselves. And I used my contacts in Sakhalin to arrange talks through people who are less suspicious from the North Korean point of view than I am. Plus, there are some studies of this issue published in recent years. And probably I should start from history because let's say, labor project, let's call it, North Korea, Russia labor export-import project. This project is not probably widely understood, it's very old. In most reference books, they will tell you that it began in 1966, 65, 67, not really. It began in 1946. It has survived changes of the regime, revolutions and counter-revolutions in Soviet Union and then Russia. And it's still operational and likely to remain operational for a very long period of time. Why? Because unlike the majority of joint projects between Russia and North Korea, which have been always largely or exclusively political in nature, the labor export project is basically about money and business, pure and simple. Because it's quite simple. It's quite simple because the Russian Far East, where most of the North Korean workers have operated for this, how much? Nearly 80 years by now. And by the way, from 1946 and until now, there was not a single year when there were no North Korean workers working somewhere in Russia. Not even a single year. The reason is simple. North Korea has labor. North Korea is a poor country. The most recent data they released on their per capita GDP was $1,318, which is basically level of a sort of poor, relatively poor African country. At the same time, for such a poor country, North Korea has a remarkably high level of education. 100% literacy, 15%, roughly 15% of North Koreans get college education. It's unbelievably well educated for such a poor country. So it has high quality labor. It's a nice part. Not so nice part. It's a rather brutal and repressive police state, which means, among other things, that people who have their families as hostages, they are very careful about what they do and what they say when overseas, which means, let's be cynical, I'm going to be very cynical today, they don't create problems for their employers and the state where they are in. A Russian demand is also simple. Labor is badly needed in Russia. Right now, the Russian Far East, its population until in the old borders, which were recently enlarged, it was 6 million people. Now it's 8 million. And its territory, as far as I remember, a bit like Indian subcontinent. So you have a huge area with almost no people, significant amount of resources. And to get Russians to go there, you have to pay very large salaries. So what to do about it? Easy. So the story began in 1946 when Russians took over southern Sakhalin, which used to be Japanese possession, and bang, after the Second World War, it's Russian possession. It used to have 300,000 Japanese living there. They left. Kuril Islands, also Japanese left, but there were fisheries. Somebody needed, the fisheries needed workers. And Russians, who are not really great admirers of seafood, and they are not really a nation of fishermen, they were not very eager to go there. What to do? To start looking for Korean workers. And then Korea, in North Korea, was yet to exist. It was just a territory under the Soviet military rule. And the local Soviet military officials worried about bad economic situation in the country. If hunger, a famine was seen as a real threat in late 1946. So the idea was let North Koreans to enlist for work in Russia. It was the first stage from 1946 to, well, depend how you count, in a sense, to the early 1960s. On that stage, Koreans could volunteer. You were a North Korean, well, I would not even say citizen. You were a resident of northern part of the Korean peninsula. It was absolutely unclear what is the state of affairs, what is the future of this territory. You could go to an office and sign up for a stint of work in Russia. It was your choice. You went there, you arrived to Russia, you worked as a normal Soviet worker. Same conditions, same salary. You had some restrictions because you were a foreign citizen, which meant you had to deal with some restrictions about travel and everything, but not very decisive. And as you get, a starving, unskilled worker from North Korean province did not dream about going to museums of Petersburg. He was much more interested in making money, which were in poor Soviet Union after the war was still much better than he would be able to get in Korea. For a while, I'm saying he because we are talking almost exclusively males, he was allowed, these people were allowed for a while to take their families. Then it was stopped. But many of them found ways through different channels to get, not many, some of them, to get their families. Many more married local women in Russia, often but not necessarily ethnic Koreans, because it was after the war, a lot of men had been killed, a great shortage of men. So some of them stayed. And this recruitment, at maximum, most of them were working in fishing industry of Sakhalin and Kuril Islands. A noticeable part was employed in timber industry. They were logging trees in Khabarovsk near Vladivostok, but it was a minority on that stage. Once again, compared to what happened on the second stage, they were free. It was their choice. North Korean authorities had no right to control who is enlisting. North Korean authorities were not a part of the game at all. It was they signed, they went, they stayed, and the maximum number at maximum was maybe about 70, 80,000 people around 1949. They could go back after their contracts expired. They could choose to get extinction. Russians were not very eager to kick them out. Actually, they were very eager to keep them in because labor, and they were very good workers. Difficult to communicate because they spoke zero or very poor Russian, but reliable, knew what they were doing, were willing to work 12, 14, 15 hours a day, especially because they were paid a bit of extra for overwork. Not as much as it would be in rich countries, but still. So they liked it. And then the Korean War began. And contrary to what you might have expected, the Soviet government did not send these people back to Korea. Actually, they were allowed to stay in Russia and began to gradually sort of, fuse with the social environment. They were marrying to local women more and more. There was the majority who did not manage to get their families. They were changing place of work. They got children who began to go to Russian schools or to Korean language schools, which existed in large numbers in Sakhalin Island at the time. So they were taking roots. In the late 1950s, North Korean government tried to get them out. They began campaign among the Sakhalin Koreans, many of whom were descendants of the earlier settlers from the 1930s, of the colonial period. Many were these workers, suggesting that they should go back. A significant number went home, quote unquote, a larger number began to get signals what's going on in North Korea, and they did not. Just one story from Sakhalin Island. Two friends were arguing in 1960. One of them wanted to go back to North Korea. And he said, you are crazy. You are going to a mad dictatorship. It's a poor country and it's a dangerous place to be, and it's irrational. Don't go. He went. A few weeks or months later, the friend who stayed received a letter which said, it's a beautiful place. We love leader, blah, 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 blah. And then everything you told me was absolutely correct. And few things which are happening here, even you would be unable to predict. It's a clear signal. And people, the idea about going back disappeared. Most of these people lived in Russia until old age. Nearly all of them died because it was a long time ago. I believe by now probably all of them, basically 75, because after the Korean War, there was only a small group in 1957, one group who arrived, additional group. But largely after 1950, any large number of North Koreans ceased to come. End of the first stage. But in 1965, 66, 67, a few stages, there were negotiations between the Soviet government and Kim Il-sung, and an interesting and exotic, a bit like, I would say, James Bondian style meeting at a battle cruiser. No, it was missile cruiser, which was actually at the sea. Top secret meeting on a warship between Brezhnev and Kim Il-sung. And data materials basically still remain largely classified, 1965. But 66, no, 65 May, I believe, on a Varyak summit. So actually, among other things, few things which we discussed was a massive revival of the scheme. But it was not 1946 model. It was a new model, 1965 model, which was extremely tough on the North Korean workers because this time Soviet authorities had no control about recruitment. 1946 model, North Korean authorities had no control. All selection was done by the North Koreans. They shipped these people to the Soviet logging camps because they were almost exclusively employed in logging. And I would say 99%. These Korean logging camps were essentially state within state. Initially, until 1984, quota was 15,000 people, then it was increased to 30,000. These people stayed in their camps. As a rule, Soviet citizens would not be allowed to enter such camps. They had to report themselves to the camp administration by late evening, 9, 10 p.m., you should be inside. Camps were usually located far away from any significant settlements, from villages, from towns, far away. And logging was done largely in winter. With roughly 40 degrees, 30, 40 degrees below zero, they moved to their provisional camps from this relatively comfortable, in very hot conditions. For a few weeks, no ways to wash yourself, basic food, cold. And they were walking, logging and logging and logging trees. And the timber was divided. Agreements, conditions have changed a number of times between Soviet and North Korean sides. North Koreans got it, partially used it for construction, other work domestically, largely immediately resold it for hard currency to Japan and some other countries. For them, it was a way to get hard currency. Very strict rules. North Koreans were discouraged to develop any kind of contacts with the Russians. Actually, especially Korean security officers were on guard against possible liaison with the Russian women. Such an incident would lead to an immediate expulsion. But sort of, as I said, states within states. In the major camp in this near a small town of Czech-Domain, they even had a prison for them, whose existence was known to the Soviet authorities, but they pretended it did not exist, never raised the issue until the early 1990s. People basically were people who committed some kind of crimes or said a bit too much to their Russian friend, could be sent to this prison and then shipped back home. Some of them escaped, and a number of escapes were successful. And these people went in hiding. But most escapees were intercepted. With the help of the North Korean administrators, their income was augmented by an intensive hunt on protected species and smuggling of herbs. Basically, everything which could be harvested legally or illegally in the forest was harvested, especially in summer. It was a sort of issue for the Russian authorities. Sometimes they raise this issue. In Moscow archives, you can find some complaints, but usually the policy was to turn a blind eye. Interestingly, about 15 years ago, a former KGB officer who was responsible for fighting North Korean espionage, and was a big issue because North Koreans were spying on the Soviet Union like crazy at the period. And he recalls interesting story. They counted coffins which were sent from these camps back home, allegedly with bodies of North Korean workers who died. The number of coffins was it was 2 or 3 times the amount of people who died. So it was used to smuggle some stuff, maybe some, herbal stuff, protected species. They like, I suddenly forgot, kabarga in Russian. Does anybody speak Russian who can? It's a kind of deer. The smelly muscus, how it's called in English? Musk deer. Musk deer. Musk deer was hunted in large quantities, this KGB section wrote report. People in Moscow thought for a long time, and they finally decided not to make a scandal. So it was a state within the state. But before you start feel sorry about North Korean workers, it was highly competitive to get there. From the early 1970s, for a while, people were afraid to go. Siberia sounds terrible. Yes, and camps in Siberia, not great enthusiasm initially, and then a lot of enthusiasm. Why? As they began to say, in Siberia, refrigerators are growing on trees because they were paid a small amount of money. Actually, they were paid at that time they began to be paid Russian money. I'm not going to details about payment system. It has changed briefly. It changed frequently initially, and then it was sort of stable. They were getting about 100 to 120 rubles, which is nothing. No sane Russian back then would be walking in Siberian forest for more than, triple, maybe triple if he is really desperate. Maybe 4 or 5 times this amount. A truck driver. You are joking. Yes, but for Koreans, it was big because they were, on top of that, they were provided with clothes and food, and they could easily save in few months for a real refrigerator, which was a bit like Lamborghini or Porsche now, here, not a joke, or color TV, which was free on sale in Russia. There were many problems in Russia with supplies in the Soviet Union. There were things which were extremely difficult to find, but there were no problems with high quality refrigerators or poor quality color TV. So you could buy it. And usually you made a deal before you went with your boss. You send me to Russia. You'll get in 3 years' time, which was a standard period, you get a fridge. And well, like here, you send this paper, Mr. Kim, and you get your portrait in 3 years' time. Isn't that nice? So, yes. So people did it. And they bought everything. They bought fridges. They bought TV sets. They bought, how to say, suddenly I should make better. Again, looking at Russian speakers. Эмалированный тазик, эмалированная посуда. Basin, no, it's special. It's a covered. They don't make it anymore. I occasionally saw it in China. It's covered with sort of enamel, whitish enamel. Back then, yes. Anyway, it was big. It was big. And people were sending, and I can quote in this regard one, she's now living here, but she's recalling the 1980s when she was a teenage girl in a small town near the border. She said, 3 people went to Russia from our towns. One came back heavy drinker and died soon. 2 others brought a lot of stuff. One of them came with a small truck full of wonderful Russian items, and they lived selling it for a long time. So it was really attractive. And then, bang, the early 1990s, collapse of the system and the new model, which we can call 2000 model, even though it began to emerge earlier. And this is a model I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes because it's still largely operational. What does it imply? It implies the old selection system is still old. You are selected. You are selected. You have to be, your right to go overseas should be approved by, well, pretty much everybody. By your manager at your place of employment, by the party secretary, which could be different from your manager, not always, by secret police officer, and by many other people. And something we have to keep in mind, that is, every single North Korean worker, not only in Russia, in China, in Middle East, everywhere, has paid a bribe to be selected. You cannot go to become a slave for free. It's very expensive to be selected for slave labor. Last time I checked, in the 17th century, they did not bribe in Central Africa village elders with a couple of cows for a right to boat a slave ship to the Caribbean. It's necessary. And when they come back, they try to do it again. Why? Yes, prizes, the highest bribe is for going to Middle East. $500–600 if you have clean CV. For Russia, before, I'm talking a situation before 2019, thank you very much. Yes, it was roughly $400, which in Korea, well, back then in, say, 2015, in Pyongyang, your average real salary, not formal, which was a couple of dollars, real salary, was probably about $50 or $60 or $70, which means, well, half your salary. So it was a size of bribe which needed to be paid for if you wanted to be selected. You got some training. And this is an ideal situation when you have a clean CV. Because if there are some problems with your file, you have to pay more. Which problems could be a problem? Yeah. First of all, you are not supposed to have relatives overseas, especially in the country where you go. But if you were willing, I know a case when somebody, instead of normal $400, paid $1,100, and he happily went to Russia in spite of having a cousin in Sakhalin. Yeah, you needed to have children. You had to be married with children because your wife and your children will be hostages, ensuring you would come back. Yeah, in some periods, but not related to Russia, you had to be a party member, but not necessarily so. So you were selected, and because most of the work in this period, yes, there were still people working in logging. There were people employed in assembly line, increasingly women, starting from roughly 2010. But majority were employed, actually 3/4, in the construction business. Construction. Some of them were basically professional construction workers. Some of them were not. So they basically got training, about a year or 2 years training, and then they went to Russia. What happened once they arrived? Here, you have to see a clear division between two groups, but it was not an unpenetratable barrier. First, you had people who were sent to work at some large construction project. Their situation was bad because they lived on site or nearby on dorms. They basically marched to work and back. Their ability to go on the city was limited, and they were given a very meager salary, which was still a fortune compared to what they would normally make back home. But roughly 2/3 of nearly all women who were employed in textile and food processing industries were under these conditions, and roughly 1/3 of males. 2/3 of males, and which is still well over half, women were a small group. 2/3 of males, which were a majority, got contract work. What does it mean? Basically, you were released to the wild. You were allowed to look for your own employer and negotiate conditions. North Korean workers made teams, and they did it themselves. They made agreement, they created teams of everything for a couple of people to a few dozen people, and they were looking for employers. They found a very good niche. The niche was essentially small-scale construction projects. If you had a house, and if you wanted to renovate your house somewhere in the city of Artyom, it's not far away from Vladivostok, what would you do? Quite likely, you would, through some website, you would find a team of the Korean construction workers who would come and do renovation. Or maybe build some storage on your land or a place. Or maybe do tiling in your city flat. This was their kind of specialty. Small scale, very flexible work. They worked usually again. They were not supposed to go to, they were not really controlled. What did government want? You were given a certain amount of money, kehekpun, planned amount, kehekpun, which you had to submit unconditionally once a month. You could go everywhere, do whichever you liked, but once a month, you should report yourself to your supervisor and give an envelope with money. How much? It depended a lot on time, place, your skills. Essentially, it was initially roughly 30% of your likely earnings, then increased to probably 40 or 45%. But if you were lucky, if you managed to make, say, above this amount, which as much as you like, you would keep everything for yourself. If you failed to deliver your kehekpun at time, usually you would get some leniency period, and then you would do it again. You could, for a few months, they would wait. But if you don't do it for a long time, basically you were ordered to go back home. Many people went AWOL. They sort of disappeared, and they were sometimes because they were afraid to go because they were in trouble, sometimes because they liked this lifestyle and they did not really want to go to North Korea at all. Some of them failed to deliver this money they hoped to make up, and so on, many reasons. Usually, they were not actively hunted by the North Korean authorities who couldn't do it. And there was always an expectation, sometimes realistic, that a fugitive will come back, make up, will pay for few months absence, and everything will be okay. Remaining money, you could, in the new system, unlike the 3-year only system of 1965, there were no restrictions about length of your stay in Russia. You could stay 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, not a problem. Some people managed to get asylum quietly. Not anymore. It's impossible in the current Russian political climate, if you read newspapers. But until, say, 5-6 years ago, it did happen occasionally. So this situation, these people sort of completely became a part of just normal Russian workers. No. And in Siberia, even their Asian faces would not be unusual. So nobody would pay attention. It was quite normal. So therefore, people there, so people stayed there. They could send their money they earned to their families. It had to be done. They had no mechanism to do it in kind of official way. Money transfers had to be done in cash. But it was not complicated. They always could send these envelopes to the families. They could go themselves. Again, unlike it used to be, they are not controlled. You can basically go to your supervisor and say, I would like to go home. I have been at home for 4 years. I want to go. Not a problem. Negotiate time and everything for, say, 1 month. Not a problem. But if when you went, you were supposed to pay for your tickets, for some other expenses related to your trip, and when back home, you were supposed to bring presents for your relatives, and of course, you would not be earning money when you are away. So most people were quite reluctant about going home, just because, it was. Then on top of that, some people managed to become low-level managers, because most of the managers were officials, often from secret police, but not always, who were dispatched to take care of all these negotiations. But it was quite common. On this level, it was a democracy. On the low level, in the work team, there could be some people who spoke good Russian, knew how to negotiate, and they gradually began to eventually they were likely to quit the normal work for money and began to act as agents, employment agents, looking for North Korean workers on one side and their potential Russian employers on other side. And these people could make a really good money. They established companies, and they could make 50,000 per year, 100,000 per year. But these were an exception because, well, it's capitalism, so some people are successful, very successful, because of combination of brain and luck. Some majority are not. So what about majority? So yes, if you were lucky, if you were speaking Russian, if you knew how to negotiate, you could come back home super rich. But if you were just a normal person who did not know how to negotiate, but knew how to do tiling work reasonably well, what would happen to you? The normal salary, the normal earnings for the period between 2010 and 2019 was about, it was seen as kind of average, $1,500 to $2,000 saved per year. It's not earnings, it's save. It's how much you would save. It means a normal 3 years period, the average worker, yes, your chances of die in an accident was quite high. For 2016, the last year for which I managed to find data, the chances for a North Korean worker to be killed in a construction accident were almost twice as high as for a Russian worker. Why? Because you were partially communication, partially skills, but largely you were working in great hurry. You're working 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, you were falling asleep at work. Time was money. Time is money. And you are working like crazy. And sometimes it ends up bad. You could break your health and you could go home completely broken. It does happen. As frequently as coming home super rich. But solid state, you are bringing $5,000 after 3 or 4 years, or 6,000 maybe after 3 or 4 years of spent in Siberia, largely near Vladivostok, in other parts of the country too. What does it mean? In 2016, 2017, $5,000 would not buy you a nice flat in Pyongyang. And 2/3 of people, and it's a policy, are from Pyongyang. Because it's a way of bribing politically important population. Once again, don't you see an irony? But in order to bribe people whom you want to be happy, making sure they would not start some rebellion, you allow these people to become slaves, to go to do so-called slave labor. Yeah, but $5,000 would not buy anything in Pyongyang after, say, 2005. No, even the worst place, the apartment, the cheapest, the market price began from $25,000. But if you were from the countryside, for this amount of money, you could buy a cheap house. And in really bad, I would say, a really hellhole somewhere, maybe even a reasonably good house. Location is important, like everywhere with real estate. But what was more important, even in Pyongyang, this amount of money would buy you a permanent rental rights for a mede, which is 70 centimeters to 2 meters, usually it's 70 centimeters wide, part of a stall in one of the Pyongyang markets. Or alternatively, a kiosk, a place of selling some, cheap Chinese sweets, candies, and beverages, soda drinks. $5,000, more than enough for such an enterprise, which would be run by your wife or maybe your mother or them together. And it means that such a place would generate you a couple of $100 of income. Again, assuming that your wife is not a genius of business and not especially lucky. She's just doing her basic work of a normal shopkeeper, $200, which is, 3 times the normal salary in Pyongyang. Doing reasonably easy and reasonably safe work. Isn't that nice? So when you did it, these people stayed at home. They come because after you come back, you had to undergo ideological re-education to cleanse your brain from dangerous ideas you were likely to pick up. You were certain to pick up. And then you would be shipped. You would be shipped back. Well, you could be shipped. You could again arrange a trip somewhere to not necessarily Russia, because if you, maybe Middle East was a better place, actually. They did not like climate. They basically said that Siberia is better than deserts of the Middle East, but money were better even there, because it was slightly different in the Middle East. Many more work on these fixed places, but you could do a construction work as a sideshow in the Middle East too. And it was very well paid. Not some old Russian lady from Artyom, but some rich Arab family in Dubai would be paying you significantly more. So, well, maybe there, or maybe again to Russia, why not? Or maybe if you are not lucky, maybe to China, which was as bad as it gets, but still better than staying at home. Yeah. But Chinese labor market has a lot of peculiarities. It's different in many regards. So it was basically, it was a way, and it was probably over the last 20 years, it was the easiest way for a normal, healthy, hardworking Korean family, North Korean family, to move to few steps up the social ladder. Because days when somebody who was adventurous and smart and brave enough to start a business and then make a small fortune, these days in North Korea passed a long time ago. And in order to go into business, you need initial investment. And you cannot go to bank and negotiate a loan. Sorry. Banks, well, sometimes you can, frankly, but it's very unusual and very difficult. So in most cases, you just have to have money somehow. And this is the way to make money, which if you are lucky, just a bit, you don't need, in this case, great luck. You have $5,000, it's near certainty that your family will go up. Or maybe you would pay for medical treatment, or maybe you would pay for education of your children, and so on and so on and so on. So it was a way for the upward social mobility. What was also quite interesting, these people, they were exposed to the outside knowledge. In theory, they were banned from buying and using smartphones. In practice, they did it. They usually had two phones, a legal kind of, push-button phone, and illegal smartphone, which they used widely to read, above all, as you easily guess, South Korean media, largely Chosun Ilbo and other right-wing media outlets, which were and are quite popular among these people. Or even better, watch North Korean TV. Sorry, South Korean TV, because one of Vladivostok stories was about the situation of Paris University professor, economic geography actually, who hired a Korean team to do renovation of his flat in downtown Vladivostok. Everything went fine, and most people left. There was only one person for about a month doing tiling, a kind of oral agreement, no formalities, just oral, basically was that he would be given a long lunch break over 2 or 3 hours, around 2 or 3 hours, when he will be watching, using satellite dish, a South Korean TV broadcast. So he came at early, he did his work, then he was, laying down at a sofa and watching South Korean TV for a couple of hours, and then continued his work. So these people were coming back. Of course, they are not going to start a revolution initially, or maybe in foreseeable future, because they came there not to bring democracy to North Korea, but they went there to bring money to their families. But this is how it works. Just one remark. It's probably just final remarks. The situation I described is something as it existed between 2010 and 2019, before the introduction of sanctions, which made use of North Korean labor technically impossible. Fortunately, these sanctions were almost openly violated by Russia initially, and now they are violated with gusto. And before the introduction of before the pandemics, which changed everything. So now we are going to, we have uncertain future, but I would expect a dramatic increase in the presence of the North Korean workers in Russia in the next few years. Because Russian economy is going through a minor economic boom. And it's one of the problem is labor. Unskilled labor wages in Russia increasing dramatically since the beginning of the war, because Keynesian economy, As some people already coined that sentence, wartime Keynesianism. A bit like of the United States of 1942. Government is pushing money to the economy, and wages are increasing, and it's increasingly difficult to find people to do unskilled labor. For the amount of money, entrepreneurs who are greedy by default, if you are not greedy, you are not going to be a businessman or woman, you better find other jobs. So basically, yeah, they are not willing to pay, but if they are not paying well, they have problems with finding people. By the way, North Korea is also going to make much more money. Question is how much North Korean government is going to take from them. They are not stupid. They will probably increase the amount of money they are taking from the workers. But I believe that currently we can realistically talk about, say, 100,000 jobs which can be taken only in Russia. Plus, let's not forget that China is first time in recent history is running in the same problems. They also need, China used to be, you know, they had a massive oversupply of cheap labor, not anymore. But Chinese conditions are much worse because in China, it's largely work at the assembly lines. They are not interested in construction works, and you cannot work, almost cannot work on contract in China, which makes it far less profitable. So bribe for going to China is about $200, $150, much, much smaller, because you are likely to make much less money in China. Yeah. So this is the current situation. Yeah. So, yeah, 45 minutes, and I'm starting to take questions. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thank you very much for Professor Lankov. Could I ask please about the re-education that might take place after 3 years returning?
3 or 10 doesn't matter, after return, yeah.
Yeah. Could you perhaps just say something about that? What it might entail?
They are sent to a center. First of all, they checked what they did when they were overseas, but it's major. They're just reading the news stories about the greatness of the great leader, of the current great leader, of the previous great leader, of a great leader to be, the evil nature of their imperialists, the scheming nature of the revisionists, and all this type of thing. Just they are sort of uploading their normal propaganda. Is it efficient? I have a sort of dualistic approach, which is unrelated to our topic. But once again, they are smart, cynical adults, largely males, sometimes females, who have been overseas, who knew that who read a lot of Chasseur Delbord and Tonal Delbord, who knew that most of the stuff is rubbish, but they are not going to commit suicide, and they would like their wife to keep running her small shop, and they think about maybe upgrading it to a restaurant after another trip. So, of course, they are memorizing everything, repeating what they are required, and pretending that they believe all this stuff. Do they really believe it? I believe not.
Thank you for that. And you said that in the 2010 to 19, the United Nations sanction regime has not been enforced.
No.
I think that at the time, Russia approved of the sanction regime because not the nuclear test and missile test, and not very effective back here at the time.
Yeah.
It was under sanction, and because of that, North Korea had to North Korean labor policy has to come back to North Korea. On the move, I think.
Well,
also,
yeah.
Also, it is reported that because of Ukraine war, because of the collapse of Prigozhin, mercenary employment, North Korean laborers are induced to come to Russia because they were frozen.
Yeah. Well, let's start from the first and second. First, let's talk timing right. Until 2017, there were no restrictions about use of labor of the North Korean citizens anywhere in the world. They were occasionally pushed away by the bleeding hearts from Europe. You know, it was a strange alliance of the right and left who basically said that we have to stop exploiting poor North Korean workers in Poland and Czechoslovakia where they used to be. Because, you know, they were working 10 hours, 12 hours, they were, a significant part of their salaries was taken for them, it was a slave labor, so these people were squeezed from Europe. It was basically around 2014-15 when it became an issue in Europe, but it was not official. It was an activity of a local trade unions, labor movement, right-wing conservatives, left-wing, you know, bleeding hearts. So the result was, of course, they were shipped back to North Korea, where, as you definitely know, they are working not more than 8 hours a day in air-conditioned offices for a salary of at least $1,000. Do you believe it? Probably not, neither me. But these people see themselves as great heroes who saved the slaves, sending them back to a real hell. Anyway, their problem. Talking about resolutions. The resolution, unfortunately, I don't remember. I sort of believe it's 1718, but don't quote me. You can check. This resolution was passed in late 2017, and it required all members of the UN to get rid of the North Korean workers by December 2019. This resolution produced a great deal of displeasure because until the relations between Russia and West went really bad, it was partially enforced. So roughly 2/3, well, maximum amount, now I did mention, when it began, there were about 34,000 North Korean workers in Russia around 2016, 2017. Roughly 2/3 were kicked out as a part of the resolution. Policy was they were usually allowed to stay, but they did not get until the end and the expiration of their visa, but they did not get extension. They were kicked out. So the number moved from down from roughly 34,000 to roughly 10,000. And then, people in Vladivostok, I talked to some managers and politicians, administrators in Vladivostok, they were very unhappy. They said, well, as usual, Moscow doesn't care about us, they're playing their games, and as a result, the construction industry in Vladivostok lost in a year or two half of workers, and the best workers. And some people, really one of my, back then, a PhD student, actually attacked a high-level Russian diplomat who was responsible for this decision. It was a kind of, he really cornered, and this PhD is short, and this diplomat was high, but it was so aggressive. Why did you vote for this stupid resolution? Anyway, well, China. We didn't want to offend China. We want to show a united line. But everything changed after the relations with the Western countries went really bad after the invasion of Ukraine. Therefore, since that time, Russians began to ignore this resolution, which I'm happy about. Again, I'm saying it. Therefore, those who stayed in Russia are staying in Russia. And of course, the outbreak of COVID created a very convenient excuse to keep these people there. And therefore, now they are probably going to have more. They are probably not going to get work visa. They will be disguised as tourists, family members, blah, 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 blah. But I expect a lot of people. Again, there are some legal problems with employing people who don't have work visa. It might be a bit of a headache, but I hope it will be solvable, because the more the better. Yeah. Second, sorry, important question. Sorry. Sorry, important. Yeah, I saw these issues. And recently, one of Mr. Putin's pocket journalists, take off the pocket back, asked this question during an interview directly. And on this level of interview, all questions have been discussed and decided. That what about, sending North Koreans as soldiers, using them as soldiers? And Putin's reply was, no, we are not going to do it. It was 13th of March, I believe, this year, the interview. And give or take a few days, I think this time I remember the date correctly. But so from my knowledge, I have not been told in any case about it. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. War is a difficult, dirty, and unpredictable business. God knows which way it will go. But right now, I'm pretty sure it's not happening right now. Will it happen in 2 years' time? I don't know. Nobody knows. Kim Jong-un doesn't know. Vladimir Putin doesn't know. Nobody knows. But for the time being, it's not happening. Is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? Probably not. Will it happen? God knows. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Lankov, what is the legal status of North Korean workers from North Korean government?
Yeah. What?
Number two.
Number, sorry again.
Legal status, official status.
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Number two, do you have any rough idea how many North Korean workers to asylum
yeah, yes. One person who used to be my student a long time ago, now he's doing his MA in Yonsei University. He is going to write a MA on this topic.
He used to be
No. He is a South Korean, but he's interested in the stuff. And his estimate, up to 100. Here, yes, because they have knowledge and money. It's much easier for them to escape. Because let's not forget, defection from North Korea is a commercial operation. It's a small, dirty secret. You have money, you can run away. You don't have money, sorry guys, it's capitalism. And they have money and they have skills and they basically know how to do it. Just one story. By the way, I did not interview this guy. I interviewed his wife. There was a family. They are living very well. There is a family in a different place, that is here. A family who were very successful farmers in North Korea. They had a pig farm. They were producing tobacco for sale. They even had their own truck, which is unusual. And it was a rich farming family. And they got money to start this farm far away in the north, close to the border, because the husband in mid-1990s went to Russia for a few years. He came back with money. They invested in the pig farms, into these fields. They became really rich farmers. He went again in 2007, 2008. He came back, and do you know what he said to his wife? He said, we are okay here, but it's not a place, this country is not a place for our children to grow up and spend their life. We are living. And they were very rich, therefore, by the local standards. Therefore, there was no problem about bribing border guards and everybody. They knew how to do it. When he was in Russia, he did a bit of background research. He learned all these routes, everything. And they began to evacuate. First, elder children, they had three, I believe. Elder children went. Then the husband followed, usually his wife, but she was the last. Actually, the evacuation took about 7 years, stage by stage, one by one. And she literally, 2017 or 18, she locked the door and walk to the border, which was not a problem because she had bribes, money which were opening the gates. You know, bodyguards were greeting her, escorting her across the border. A four-wheel drive was comfortable waiting for her on the other side of the border. Anyway, they are living not far away from my university. Very happy, very smart woman, very interesting. I did not even interview her husband. Yes, your question, about 100, roughly, many dozen. Yes, they belong, most of them, there are a few ways. Most of them belong to a company whose name and career, unfortunately, I don't remember right now. I should do better preparations. I used to know. I will know when I go back to this topic soon, but not now. It's called Overseas Construction Company in English. So they are employees and sent their employees dispatched to work overseas of this company. But there are many other companies which have official right to be involved in the construction or other kind of overseas activity. North Koreans usually say, foreign trade companies, hard currency earning companies. People go there, they as employees of these companies. And it can be very tricky. So technically you are sent, you know, your company make an agreement with some Russian company to do logging work in Siberia, but actually you come, you are on contract, and you are, you know, doing gardening or tiling in Vladivostok. But technically you are an employee. They all are employees of some North Korean firms which have official right to send their personnel overseas, and agreement, very often just kind of symbolic paper agreement nobody takes seriously, but still a piece of paper with signatures with Russian companies.
Let's have the Zoom questions.
So, yeah, someone here says, thank you for the informative talk. Are there cases that returned North Korean laborers turned into Donju?
Yes, a lot. Because, again, it's the only way. Of course, you have to be lucky, restless, hardworking, scheming, dedicated. It's a condition for becoming a really rich in any society. Good and bad qualities. But you get starting money. You know, 7-8 years overseas, with some luck, you can come with few $10,000. And few $10,000 would qualify you to become a Donju immediately. More likely, you will come back with small amount of money, but you, or more likely your wife or your mother, it's a women's business. In market economy in North Korea is essentially largely a female affair. She will invest it smartly, and bam, you are a rich family. Mm-hmm.
The Middle East is the usual destination, and related to you mentioned, you know, the European. Are there any other continents, for example, Africa?
Africa, yes.
And is there any sort of systematic movement? I would assume some entity like the Human Rights Council, the one that in the US, sort of in low-profile way promote this kind of you know, labor contracts.
They shouldn't. Well, first, let's go back. 3 questions. 4. Middle East. They used to be in Qatar, in Emirates, in Dubai, and as far as I know, but I would not bet on it, in Saudi Arabia. Now my understanding is that they all have been sent back, but I cannot rule out, because they are such a good and cheap and reliable labor, that some of them are still kept there secretly. So I will not be surprised if there are some North Koreans who are instructed to claim they are Chinese and working somewhere in the Emirates. I don't have such information, but I will not be surprised if this is the case. But it's a question mark. In Europe, they used to be in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, oh, sorry, in Czechia. Czechoslovakia ceased to exist, I'm sorry. Czechia, Czech Republic, and Malta, out of places, all places. Because historically, North Korea has had good relations with Malta. Strangely enough, yes, yeah. I don't know why. Sorry, I know a bit, but maybe not all. But having said that, so in Malta, my understanding is that about 5-7 years, about 10 years ago, the European human rights organizations and the European largely left started a campaign to get rid of the slave labor. And your last question, unfortunately, in this regard, human rights protection group are not an ally, but the opponent. Because I believe that if you want to really improve lifestyle in North Korea, to improve living standards and health, and also bring some dangerous, quote unquote, ideas to the North Korean minds and strengthen the parts of economy and society which are bringing positive changes. You should encourage it. But it's not how majority of people see it. Majority of people saying they are poor slaves, we should get rid of them, we should get rid of the slave labor because they are exploited. They are, of course they are, because they are paying such a massive amount of money to the government, because they are working in harsh conditions to meet their financial demands, so they should be sent back, as again, to the freedom and prosperity of North Korea. But this is how the logic works, and I have had enough. On top of that, there is another option, which I understand. I don't share, but I understand another logic. Official logic is we are protecting poor slaves, which is nonsense. But there is something which is seldom pronounced, but we are undermining income. We are reducing the income of the North Korean government and the Kim family regime. Because, say, these people were sending a significant amount, something between $250 million a year to North Korea. Now it's probably less important, but 10 years, 15 years ago, it was a considerable amount of money. It was a considerable amount of money. Therefore, it's still considerable, but there have now other sources of income, cryptocurrency, all this hacking scheme, everything. But back then, it was a major source of income. So people, when they were saying that they were insisting they were protecting poor North Koreans, really cared more about undermining financial basis of the North Korean regime, which I do understand, because the first type of argument is frankly dishonest and stupid. The second, yes, war is war. You want to create as many trouble to your enemy as possible. Normal. I completely understand. But I don't share, but I understand. And I believe that in many cases, the real reason behind all this stuff, even they were talking about protection of poor slaves, it was just deprive North Korea of money, which are used, as you guess, not exactly and not exclusively for humanitarian purposes, but for producing some wonderful flying devices, which are flying over the Pacific Ocean. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I'm wondering whether, from your perspective, the North Korean regime allowed it to continue similar to how they allow Chinese imports to come in as the kind of unofficial, just keep society stable for them, doing their work for them, or do you think it's more of a perspective of building bilateral ties with Russia?
No. They're not going to do. North Korean government, at least, never does anything for free. Period. So it's not because they want bilateral relations. They get money. Why do they tolerate it? Yes, these people come back with the dangerous ideas, but frankly, it has been the case for 80 years. And the Kim family is still in place and preparing for the third power transition, hereditary transition. So they believe they would be able to control these people. And they are probably right, because these people, no matter what they think about their government, just one story about it. I talked to a North Korean worker. We interacted a lot in China about 10 years ago. He moved through a different scheme, which I did not mention, which is applicable to China. But anyway, it's not a part of what I explained. There were many other schemes. This is a major one, but we're talking about Russia. He was there anyway. And he, very smart person. I like him very much. He had good education, but he was making money by physical labor as a construction worker. And he was sort of undecided whether he should go back or defect to the south. He had no illusions about his government. But having considered everything, he went back home. Why? Because of children. Had he defected, his children, who were doing a reasonably good career in the North Korean system, would be in trouble. Probably they would not be sent to prison. No, it's a common story, which is not true. But they would have serious damage. They would basically their careers would be ruined or at least very seriously damaged. And he knew it. And he decided that he'd better go home. It's about controlling these people. Hostages, the system of family responsibility, and hostages make wonders. People are much easier to terrify than most people believe. So North Korean government tolerates them. And on top of that, let's not consider the North Korean government some kind of crazy guys who are dreaming about, just starving their people. No, they want their country to be rich and affluent as long as they stay in control. This is a bottom line. So if some developments is bad for them staying in power, they don't do it. But if they believe it's compatible, they are quite enthusiastic. They want to keep their people happy, not only because of political concerns, but because they have national solidarity and sense of responsibility, like most governments. But like most governments, they also want to stay in power. Yeah, so.
Thank you.